Yeah, she got.
Well, good morning. Welcome to May 15th meeting with the Alabama chapter of ASSP. Next slide, please. If you would, please stand and join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Brady, will you lead us in?
Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together. We thank you for companies we work for and the employees we have. We just ask your shield of protection over them. We thank you for Jeff coming today, and we ask you just to bless him as he does this presentation and for us to our understanding. And just ask that this help our employees and our operations. We thank you for the food. We thank you for this time of fellowship. And most of all, we thank you for your gifts and your praise. And in all things we praise thee and love thee. Thanks to thee. Amen.
Amen.
Next slide, please. For those of you who attend on Zoom, unfortunately, our system's set up so that only one person will register, and you can have as many as you want attending. If they need CEUs, please email us their name, home or business address, and a phone number so we can get the CEUs to them. Our presenter today is Mr. Jeff Rogers with AGC Services. He's going to present today on insurance or workers' comp, what you need to know, or what you should know. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. And before I start, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, but I want to commend ASSP as a whole and you as individuals, because a lot of the data and information we're going to talk about today would not be where it is without ASSP and without the people that make up ASSP. So I started back in the mid-90s working for a high-risk specialty contractor. I worked for the crane and rigging side company. My family, going back generations, had always worked in construction. And as you all know that were around in the mid-90s, that's when we really started to see some shifts in risk management, and companies started to take a little bit of ownership. And I became the de facto risk management guy for the crane rental division and handled the insurance. Hated it. I swore it could not be anything worse. It was almost as bad as doing taxes. But what I found was that there were very few people on the insurance side, particularly the underwriting, that truly understood what it was we did and how we did it. And that's kind of how I ended up in insurance. So a few years later, I end up figured if I can't beat them, I join them. So I went on the other side of the desk. Instead of being the purchaser of insurance, became a seller for a small boutique insurance firm. I worked with contractors and manufacturers throughout Alabama. All that time with both those stints, I've remained very active in AGC. I came to work in AGC in March of 2012. I started off doing nothing but association work, member representation. I still do a lot of that. I still do a lot with workforce development. I'm the de facto union delegate for Alabama AGC and our members that work and employ organized labor. And I'm also the de facto environmental consultant with AGC. So, but my 80 to 90% of my job is spent dealing with what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit about the history of workers' compensation. It first became evidenced in 2050, so almost 4,000 years ago, with the law of, and I'm going to butcher this, Namu in ancient Syria. That's the first documented evidence of there being some form of a workers' compensation system that employees, primarily laborers who were used to build structures, if they got hurt, they got compensated for their injuries. Fast forward to 1750 BC, it really starts to take hold in other parts of the world. We see it in Babylon, Greece, Rome, Arab countries, and China started to adopt somewhat of a workers' compensation system. They expanded it to include compensation for the loss of use of body parts. But things began to change in the Middle Ages. So mid 500, late 500s AD to the mid 1700s AD, compensation for workplace injuries became more arbitrary. It was really up to the business owner or owner if he wanted to compensate someone for a workplace injury. That all came to a head with the Industrial Revolution, with factories, machineries becoming more prevalent, working conditions became more hazardous. There is evidence of employees actually taking employers to court over workplace injuries. A lot of those were denied. And they had a term for this. It was called the unholy trinity. Courts relied upon the assumption of risk, fellow servant rule, and contributory negligence often to deny those workplace injuries. 1838 in Europe, Germany adopted laws protecting railroad employees. That was really the first start of the modern day workers' compensation system. In 1880, England passed an Employers' Liability Act. 1884, Germany enacts a formal workers' compensation plan. 1897, England passed its Workers' Compensation Act. Something happened in 1911 to really change things here in the United States, and it helped form ASSP. And it was one of the worst workplace disasters in the history of our country. It was a Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, killed 146 workers. Debated whether it was 141, 148. Most people fall on 146. That started to lead to a push for formalized workers' compensation in the United States. If you're not familiar with that factory fire, I think the oldest worker was 46. There were some 14 and 15-year-olds that were working. They were basically locked in this factory to prevent employee theft and people from taking breaks, sneaking off. Fire breaks out. Everyone inside the factory just about is killed. There were very few survivors. 1917, the U.S. Supreme Court, there were several employers who felt like workers' compensation was not fair or should not be mandatory in their state, so they pushed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirms the constitutionality of the work comp system. We're going to talk a little more about that system. 1920, most states in the United States at that time had workers' compensation. Alabama formally passed. It did have an informal system dating back to the 1800s, but the formal statute was passed in 1919. It was enacted in January 1 of 1920. 1949, the last state, and you could probably guess which one that is, formally adopted. Texas technically had passed another statute after that, but they already had a workers' compensation system in place. So all the data, except for one slide, and I'll let you know which slide that is, all the data you're going to see today comes from two sources. One from the National Council on Compensation Insurance. It's the largest national work comp rating bureau, known as NCCI. It sets the rates, the workers' compensation rates by class code. It also, for the most part, probably more famed for being the creator and founder of the experience modification rating, the EMR or the MOD. And then AM Best, which is the largest global credit rating agency for insurance companies. Both of these agencies are more than 100 years old. So some of the basics about workers' compensation. It is federally mandated, but it is state regulated. Each state has its own system. In some ways, that works really, really well. And for other reasons, it kind of complicates things. It is a no-fault system. So it is to cover an employee workplace injury or death, regardless of who's at fault. It's also designed to protect the employer from other future liabilities. So in most states, some states, there are some workarounds, but in most states, that is what they call exclusive remedy is provided to the employer, that if an employee gets injured and the employer is providing workers' compensation benefits, that employer's liability for that injury is released. There are some ways around that. Workplace injuries caused by intentional harm, fellow employee, or by a third party, there could still be employer's liability involved. And then some states have also opened the door for that. But for the most part, most states, United States, if an employer is providing workers' compensation benefits to an injured worker, that employee cannot sue their employer for liability. It is a three-party relationship between the employee, the employer, and the insurance provider. Primarily has three objectives: provide prompt medical care for the injured worker, reduce court costs and delays for both the employee and the employer, and incentivize employers to provide safe workplace. So you may ask, I thought you just said employers cannot be sued for liability. Just because there's a workers' compensation claim, there's oftentimes a lot of litigation. I will give you an example of one yesterday that we were involved with. It was a workplace fatality. One of the employees who was killed had multiple dependents with multiple caregivers, and we really had no idea who technically was a dependent. And so we asked the court to help us make that determination. So you can still have some court proceedings with workers' compensation that have nothing to do with the liability. And workers' compensation is designed to incentivize employers to provide a safe workplace. And we'll go into some of that. Workers' compensation is provided typically by two different providers, private insurance carriers. 90% of all the workers' compensation in the United States is provided by a private insurance carrier, either a global, national, or regional insurance company. That's the Travelers, the CNAs, the Zurichs, the FCCIs, the Liberty Mutuals. 10% of the workers' compensation in this country are provided by state funds. We're going to get into that a little bit more. In 2025, the estimated total annual workers' compensation premium paid in the United States, $45.6 billion. Something interesting to note here. Out of all the lines of commercial or business insurance coverage, workers' compensation has been the most profitable for the last decade. Overall, it's been the most profitable for the past 2 decades. It has also been the line with the most rate decreases in the past decade. I can tell you with the workers' compensation fund that I manage, in the last 10 years, we've reduced rates by 48.6%. In the last 20 years, we have reduced rates by 86%. So what that means is for every dollar we brought in back in 2006, we're now getting 14 cents. A lot of that is attributable to you all and the work that you all have done. We're going to talk a little bit about the dynamics in that. All right, so one thing I do want to point out about workers' compensation that you do need to know, because I know we have members that work all over the country. I mentioned at the very start that it's federally mandated, so the federal government requires employers to have it, but it's up to the state to regulate it. Every blue shaded state, whether it's dark blue or light blue, reports to NCCI. NCCI determines those rates in those states for all class codes. Those in the pink are the independent bureau states. That's where the actual states manage the workers' compensation program. They set the rates. They provide the workers' compensation insurance, typically through a state fund. The monopolistic states, four shaded in orange, I need to go back to the pink shaded. The pink shaded states provide their information to NCCI. They drop their data to NCCI, but they do not use NCCI's data to determine any of their rates. The orange shaded rates operate autonomously, each on their own accord. If you have an employee work in those states, you're going to have to procure coverage directly from that state. According to AM Best, this is a 2025 data. This came out November 2025. It involves premium figures from 2024 because 2025 was still incomplete. These are the top 10 largest providers of workers' compensation in the United States, led by Travelers with $3.8 billion. You got Travelers, Hartford, AmTrust, Zurich, Chubb, Berkshire Hathaway, which operates a number of insurance companies, Liberty Mutual, the state insurance workers' comp fund, that is the California state fund. AF Group, which also has it's a specialty insurance company, has owned several companies they write workers' comp with, and Old Republic. Those top 10 provide 43% of all the workers' compensation in the United States. In Alabama, these are the top 10. You're going to see a lot of the same similar players listed in the top 10, with Zurich leading it with 47.3 million, AmTrust being at number 10 with 14.4 million. What is different here than what you saw in the national? In the Alabama work comp market, the total premium for workers' compensation for Alabama employees is $440 million, 2024. Out of that $440 million, approximately $67 million of that is provided by self-insurance funds, such as CompTrust AGC. Alabama is one of the few states that have a very healthy group self-insurance fund system. So group self-insurance funds write approximately 16% of that $440 million in premium. If we included these, the reason they are not included is out of the 17 group funds that operate in Alabama, soon to be 18, CompTrust AGC is the only one rated with AM Best. So AM Best does not include any of the group funds in these rankings. CompTrust would be number 8 right here between American Insurance Group and Berkshire Hathaway we wrote 15.2 million in 2025. There would be 4 other funds in that top 10, the Truckers Fund, Alabama Self-Insured, and the Sheffield Fund and Alicomp should all also be in those top 10. You can purchase workers' compensation one of 2 ways: guaranteed cost or under alternative risk financing plans. 90% of businesses in America are going to purchase workers' compensation through guaranteed costs. standard insurance company, or through an assigned risk plan. The other 10% are going to purchase more unique forms of insurance. We're going to go into more detail on both of these, either through self-insurance, captives, retro plans, or deductibles. Guaranteed cost programs are exactly what they sound like, guaranteed cost. What that means is an employer is going to pay a set amount for workers' compensation premium with the understanding that if they have a claim, whether they have no claims or whether they have 100 claims, they're going to pay the same amount of premium irregardless of the number of claims and how much is paid out. The reason it is most popular is these three pros right here. You typically pay a predictable, competitive premium, which makes it easier for the administrative side to budget, to estimate their cost. It also reduces administrative burden, and it transfers the risk, almost 100% of the risk, to the insurance company. The arguments against going to a guaranteed cost program is they offer very little other than in maybe the form of a discount or a credit. There's very little financial reward for good safety performance. The other con against it is that when you're a guaranteed cost program, that insurance company is not just rating you, they're rating you with all the others in your industry. So if you perform better than the average performer in your industry, you're paying a little bit higher premium for the mistakes of others. The other con against it is, as a result, it can result in higher overall insurance costs with less coverage options. And this is what that can happen one of two different ways. But if your losses are bad and you get non-renewed by your insurance carrier, your options become much, much less. You either most likely will have to go to assigned risk, where rates are a minimum 3 to 4 times higher than what you're probably paying on the competitive market, or you're going to have to go to one of these other options, alternative risk financing, with self-insurance, captive insurance, retro plans, large deductible plans. So self-insurance is when a company makes a decision that they either want to self-insure their company solely, or they want to self-insure their company as part of a group. And what you see in Alabama more commonly are the group funds, where someone joins a particular trade association, a sponsoring association that provides workers' compensation coverage for like-minded companies. I will tell you, one of the good things about self-insurance, particularly if you're with a group self-insurance fund, is they typically outperform the national regional insurance carriers because they focus on one industry and they tend to know that industry better than an insurance company. They also know who they're insuring. But it operates typically, unless in most cases with the group funds, it's a guaranteed cost benefit. You're not having to invest any money on the front end typically to get in. You're just paying your premium. Now, if you're a self-insured company solely on your own, then you are going to have to collateralize that. There's going to be some form of financial investment to get that approved. The state just recently increased those requirements for companies to do that, but you would still be surprised at how low those financial requirements are. Captive insurance is the hot topic in insurance in general. You see this little kind of footnote in parentheses behind it. 55% of all captives in the world operate in the United States. The next largest is Europe, as a whole, as a continent. And it's close to 20%. You want to guess the reason for the disparity? Yep, it's the litigious society and a little bit of sophistication of companies, but primarily the litigious environment has driven the growth of captives.
And there were a lot of captives there with
Yes.
nice setups.
Yep, and it is the hot topic and hot. So this is where a company, much like the self-insured option, a company makes a choice to purchase insurance either solely on their own through what they call a cell captive, or through a group captive where they join a captive with other companies and they share the premium and the risk. If you enter into a captive, whether it's a cell captive or a group captive, it's going to require you to collateralize, put up front money for your expected losses. There will be an actuarial study done to determine your rates, an actuarial study done to determine what your expected losses are going to be. You're going to have to front that money. And then as you get in and you have claims and they develop each year, they're going to true up what that collateral is going to be. If you perform better than what the actuary anticipated, you may get money back either in the form of a dividend or sometimes a credit. If you performed worse than what the actuary anticipated, you're going to be asked to put up additional money. Retrospective plans, in my opinion, are very underrated, and most people aren't even familiar with them. It's an old insurance tool. They have been very good for a lot of people in the construction industry. Usually where they come into play is when it's with a company that has a claim problem. They either have a lot of claims or they just have a few, but they all tend to be high dollar. And what it does is the insurance company agrees to upfront provide insurance for an estimated premium amount, but then they're going to take a retrospective look each year at the end to look at the claims. And then they're going to true up what that company actually owes in premium. So for example, we insure about a dozen companies in Alabama. All but one have been given the opportunity to get off of the retro plan. Most of them that stay on because of the ability, again, to get money back. So if they perform better than anticipated, they'll get either a credit or in the form of a check, money back. But if they perform worse than expected, we're going to charge them additional premium. Lastly, large deductible plans are becoming more and more common. That's where an employer purchases workers' compensation insurance, but they want some skin in the game. They don't want all the skin in the game on a claim, so they choose to operate under a deductible. And those deductibles under large deductible plans typically will start out at $25,000. They can work their way up to in excess of $1 million per claim. In lieu of the employer paying the deductible on each and every claim, they receive a premium credit. So it's a way for them to save some money on premium. It's also in the construction industry utilized often to try to mitigate the impact of claims on the EMR or the mod. These options are seen as risk and reward. You invest in the risk and the claims are going to determine your final results. I will tell you, out of the two options, typically those that are insured under alternative risk financing programs or plans outperform those under guaranteed cost for a number of factors. A lot of them tend to be larger companies that are a little more sophisticated, have a larger staff. But I firmly believe it's because they are more vested in their program. The pros, I kind of went through those already. You have the potential for lower premium and additional savings and profits. You do get a specific custom underwriting process. So you are being looked at for you, and you aren't being compared so much or as much to those bad actors that do the same work that you do but have a worse claim history. And you do have more active participation in the entire process, underwriting, claims, and the risk engineering. The cons are, as compared to guaranteed costs, it's going to require some type of capital investment, and it's going to be adjustable. Just because you have to put in $1 million this year doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put the same in next year. It could go down, it could go up. It requires a long-term financial commitment. They aren't easy to get in, but they're easier to get in than they are to get out, because if you do choose to get out of a captive or get out of the self-insurance arena and you have some skin in the game on it, you aren't going to be totally out to those claims typically run off or roll off the loss history. So how is your workers' compensation premium determined? There are 5 elements to it. Most people are aware that the primary element is off worker classification and payrolls for those workers. Mentioned earlier, the NCCI loss costs. So if you paid close attention to that map, you'll see that NCCI sets the rates for only 36 of the states. But in those states that they don't operate in, except for a few, they will utilize NCCI's rating, the rating system with their own data. So NCCI is not producing necessarily the rates, but typically they're operating a very similar system. And those rates are determined by loss costs. So basically, NCCI, for every worker classification, figures out what the average loss cost is going to be for those classes, and that's how they come up with rates. You got the experience modification rate, the EMR or the mod. We're going to talk about that. And then there are underwriting credits and debits that each insurance company may apply based off a company's loss history. Last but not least, your premium is going to be determined by an insurance company's loss cost multiplier. Is it good to look that up? In most states, you can look that information up. It is good to look up, but I can tell you it's not always full disclosure, I will tell you that with Comp Trust, our loss cost multiplier will be higher than some others, but it's higher for a reason, because we invest more money into some products that we think ultimately are going to save our insureds more money in the end. So we're much more heavy on loss control, data analytics, and claims administration. But our loss costs are also going to affect your premium. So our costs to do business are going to affect your rates. Same with every insurance company. So if you have a claim, there's going to be 2 types of costs: direct costs and indirect costs. The direct cost of claims, most people are familiar with. You got your medical expenses. That's going to be every medical service that's provided to employee once they're hurt. Ambulatory services, emergency room services, doctor's appointments, surgeries, physical therapies, pain management, which is a large cost, PTSD. That is not required in every state, but before long you will see that in every state. Corrective devices and implants, prescription medications. I will tell you the 2 factors that make up most of the medical expense are going to be inpatient hospital visits, and pharmacy. Pharmacy on a year-by-year basis typically is not that high on a claim, but over the course of long-term claims, it's going to be one of your largest expense drivers. Then you have the indemnity benefits. Those are the wages that are being paid to the employee or the employee's family in the event of a death. That is usually going to be the largest cost of indemnity benefits. In Alabama, the employer can opt to pay the wage, continue to pay the wage in lieu of the insurance company doing that. Now, why would an employer do that? Employer would do that to try to mitigate the impact of the claim on the mod. Because if the insurance company is paying that wage, it's going to report that as an indemnity benefit, and it can impact that mod. If the employer just continues to pay the wage in lieu of that, that money is left out of that claim, and so you don't have the mod impact. Another reason why an employer may opt to do that is studies have shown that employers that continue to pay an employee, because the insurance company pays, it's going to be a reduced amount. But if the employer continues to pay the employee their pay, whether it's just for an extended period of time or the entire time they're out, there tends to be less litigation down the road, and claims tend to close sooner with that. Legal expense is an indemnity benefit and the cost for claims administration. So we utilize triage. We utilize triage because the mod or the EMR is so important to our contractors. We provide it as a service, one, to save us money, because about 30% of claims where they go see a doctor could probably be self-treated with some medical guidance and advice. So we do it for that, but we also do it to help keep those type of claims off the mod. And then expense reserve. So that's going to be all the future claims expense. The percentage of cost between each category varies by the size and type of claim. So in Alabama, you got the categories or classifications of each claim. You have permanent total disability, permanent partial disability, temporary partial disability, and each of those, depending on which classification the injury falls in, it determines what is actually paid out. The medical expense on a permanent and total is almost always going to be much higher than the indemnity if it's a catastrophic claim. Indirect costs. These are the costs that most companies don't ever take into account, the impact of a work comp claim. This is usually what separates the profitable companies from the not profitable companies, because those that focus on this indirect cost claims tend to have less claims because they're more vested in the process. But this is where a work comp claim costs you money that is sometimes hard to compute and quantify, because you're going to have some administrative time from a supervisor or supervisors dedicated to that claim. There will be a production disruption. There will be lost time or downtime with a claim, associated with a claim. If that employee has to lose time, you have to replace, typically in most instances, you replace that employee with another who is not necessarily as experienced or trained. So you have some lost time with that, which leads to decreased efficiency. And then as you have claims, the other cost that is hard to actually quantify is what impact it's going to have on future insurance premiums. Your insurance premiums are most likely going to go up because your mod's going to go up, and you're probably going to lose some credits or discounts that an underwriter may be providing. The severity of a claim determines the amount of indirect cost. I was going to include a table for you all. You can find it on OSHA's website, but in full disclosure, it is dated. It is data that was provided by the actuarial team at NCCI. It goes back to 2018, 2019. But the way it works is you plug in your direct cost of a claim, And then it will give you a range of what your indirect costs are going to be. This data is from NCCI. These are your most expensive claims by calls. NVAs are the number one. So I will tell you, every year, CompTrust tracks all this data. NVAs is not even in our top 25 as number of claims, but it will almost routinely, year by year, will come in the top 2 to 5 in cost per claim. Burns, number 2, falls and slips. Number 3, caught betweens. Number 4. An interesting footnote to NCCI, catastrophic claims, which they classify as claims greater than $2 million, account for only 0.1% of all work comp claims and only make up of 2% of all claims costs. The most expensive claims by nature: amputations, number 1, other trauma, number 2, fracture, crush, or dislocation, number 3, and burns. And again, this information is all industry. If you were, and we can dig down into the individual industries, this data is going to fluctuate and fluctuate greatly. Most expensive claims by body parts: head or central nervous system. That is closely associated with the NVAs. Most NVAs, the most injuries, besides maybe a fracture, are going to be to the head or central nervous system. Multiple body parts, number 2. Next, number 3, hip, thighs, and pelvis is number 4. Leg, number 5, that's typically going to be knees, arms, or shoulders. I'll get to that in just a second. Industries with the highest number of claims. This is the most recent data provided by NCCI. Construction was number 1. Healthcare and social assistance was number 2. Transportation and warehousing, number 3. Manufacturing, number 4. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. What would you think will be the difference in claims between construction and healthcare and social assistance? And what types of claims do you think are most frequent? Yep.
Healthcare and social assistance. There's tons of sprains and strains.
That's it. Yep. Transportation and housing, that's where you're going to see the most NVAs, warehousing. Manufacturing, going to be a lot of soft tissue, ergonomic. Agriculture, forestry, that's where we tend to see a lot of the crushes and fractures and sprains. All right. This is the only slide that's not based off NCCI or AM Best data. 4 of what I would consider the blue chip insurance companies, Travelers, CNA, Liberty Mutual, and Zurich, run a very similar, they all call it different things, claim studies. Some of them call injury impact reports. And CompTrust AGC followed suit about 7 or 8 years ago. So every year we try to track the same data they track. I don't think any of this would be any surprise to you all. The thing that I want to point out about it is, out of the 5 insurance companies referenced there, this was the only 2 things they totally agreed with that weren't different in some form or fashion. Claims frequency, years of experience, number 1, less than 1 year on the job. Depending on the insurance company, it ranged from 30% of all claims. I will tell you in 2025 for CompTrust, it was 37% less than 1 year. If you stake it to 2 years, 51% of all claims we had last year were employees been on the job less than 2 years. Claims, but those claims were also the least expensive claims for a variety of reasons. They tend to heal quicker. Injuries typically aren't as severe. Claim severity, and this is for a lost time standpoint, number of days off the job. Number 1 demographic was 60 and older. I'll go back and see what. Yeah.
Can I throw something in?
Yes, absolutely.
If you go back a couple, you'll have the but looking back a couple of slides, when we're talking about indirect costs, one other thing that associates closely with this is you talked about one of the indirect costs is somebody goes out for an injury, you gotta replace them with somebody else. Most times that replacement is a new employee. You replace them with somebody else as a new employee who is more likely to get injured. And so we have companies that we work with that fall into this vicious cycle of they get injuries, they replace that person with a new employee who gets injured, who gets replaced with a new employee who gets injured. So the companies that are not on top of their safety protocols, they fall into this bad cycle of constantly replacing their people with people who are more likely to get claims again.
That is a terrific point, and it's not something we're just seeing in Alabama. You're seeing it all over the country, because the one good thing, and I kudos to Alabama, because I do think they were ahead of the game when it came to workforce development. We have a younger workforce now, and we're providing better training at the high school level. But that training is still somewhat limited. And you remember what it was like being 18, 19 years old. You think you know everything, but until you get hurt, you don't really know anything. And that's exactly what's happening. We're getting an influx of young people who are opting to, out of high school, go straight into industry. And they're excited, and they're wanting to learn, and they're wanting to move up, and they're wanting to prove themselves. And they get in there, and they're susceptible to 100%, because we're losing the experience and replacing it with inexperience. All right, so the experience modification rating, the EMR or MOD. All right, so in those 36 states, and then when I say states, that includes District of Columbia and some of the Commonwealths, NCCI sets the rates for those states. In addition, they set the MOD or the EMR for every employer that is insured by a company that reports to NCCI. I will also say, out of the 17, soon to be 18 funds that operate in Alabama, we are the only one to report to NCCI, because it's the gold standard. They got all the best data, the most data. But it's been a blessing and a curse in construction, and sometimes in manufacturing and warehousing, can be some in transportation. Because a lot of times, who's allowed to come on the premises has been determined by either an insurance company or a lawyer who has the best interest of their client in mind. And one of the easiest ways to determine who is safe and who is not safe, in their opinion, is to look at the EMR or the MOD. But if you look at the EMR or the MOD as it's prepared by NCCI, it's on a worksheet. There's a disclaimer at the bottom that says this is an underwriting tool. It is not to be interpreted as an indicator of safety performance. Ironically, most insurance companies or state funds that promulgate or compute their own EMRs or MODs, they just don't do it on NCCI paper. Most of them still adopt or compute the MODs the same way. So basically, the way they compute the MODs, they're going to take your worker classifications, your payrolls. They're going to compare you to a peer company that performs work in the same state or region that you're working in, similar size, similar scope. They're going to separate it by states. They're going to include your expected losses for a company doing what you do of your size, and they're going to compare it with your actual losses that you incur, and they're going to go back for the last 3 full calendar years to determine that information. If a company is deemed average, their MOD is going to be a 1.0. Now, ironically, you really don't qualify for a complete mod through NCCI unless you've been in business for 3 full years. So, but they start those startup companies at a 1.0 and give you the benefit of the doubt. If you're better than your peer group, you're better than the industry average, your mod's actually going to be below a 1. That modifier is attached or multiplied to your premium. So if your mod's below a 1, you're going to get a discount on premium. If your loss history is worse than your peer or the industry average, your mod's going to be above a 1. So you get a debit added to that premium. So let's say your premium's 100,000 and your mod's a 1.10, you're going to get hit an additional 10,000 in premium for that. An important thing to note about the mod, because I really don't go into this in this presentation about audits and class codes, but there are companies that feel like they can be more competitive if they better control their class codes. And if there's a question between 2 class codes, they err on the side of the lowest rate. That is a very quick way to get your mod above a 1.0. And it's a complicated way to explain, in concept to explain. But if you want a true mod, you really need to have those, because I'm telling you, the data and the amounts of data that NCCI has to compute those it's the biggest source of data for that. Their data is going to be better than anyone else. It is crazy. We don't always disagree with some of their findings, but more often than not, their findings are going to be spot on, their estimates. Yes. No, so it is for workers' compensation, it is going to be an NCCI class code. It does. There's a cross-reference guide to the NAIC that a lot of insurance professionals will use because only workers' compensation uses the NCCI class codes, and it's a 4-digit code. NAIC is typically a 5-digit. But yeah. So this is what I'll give you an example on construction. Most construction companies want to put a superintendent and a foreman in what is deemed the executive supervisor class code because they're an executive supervisor. But the actual description of what they call the scope of that class code says for a superintendent or foreman to qualify as executive supervisor, there has to be a layer of supervision between that person and the people working in the field. That could be in the form of a foreman working for a subcontractor, or that could be in the form of a foreman working for that general contractor. Because that rate is being figured and the anticipated loss is being figured, and that most likely that executive supervisor is not going to spend a lot of time on the actual job site. If that's not the case, then they're supposed to go into the class code of the whatever it is they're supervising. Let's say it's carpentry. We'll have a half a dozen to a dozen claims a year where there's a superintendent that was put in executive supervisor that should have been placed in that working class code because there was not that layer of supervision. The impact on that mod, because the executive supervisor class code is 17 cents, the carpentry is going to be $5 and some odd, be tremendous impact on their mod. In closing, I will share with you what a few things we notice being in the business that we're in. And these are some of the just observations we have made from companies that are not just safe, but they're extremely profitable. And they're the companies that other companies strive to be like. And these are some of the common threads between them. This is after the claim. What we see is they tend to identify and investigate every claim, and not just every claim, the near misses. They don't, and this is a stark difference from the 1990s when I first entered. You know, you had a near miss, whoo, that was good, and you just went on. The companies that outperform the industry average, they investigate every claim, whether it's just a little nick, cut, scrape, or whether it is a catastrophic claim, and they're going to treat them all the same. They're going to look for the root causes. They are going to have a formal process, internal and external, where certain people internally are going to be involved, they're going to investigate, going to report, and then they're going to mitigate it in the future. They take immediate ownership and action of the claim. They ensure the employee receives care and the claims adjuster receives info. I'm going to tie that in with number 4, communicate early and often. They tend to communicate early and often with the employee and the claims adjuster. So, something unique happened in 2020 besides a pandemic, but it was a result of the pandemic. There was claims nationwide, every insurance company, I don't care who you were, large or small, claims went down. Why do you think claims went down? Yep. And it took a segment out of the population that really doesn't want to work. I can tell you, based off observation, there are typically 2 types of claimants. There are claimants who want to work, and then there are claimants who don't want to work. The claimants that don't want to work, they don't want to work. They're going to do everything they can to not have to go back to work. If you communicate early and often and you take ownership of that, you can usually make that determination, because, man, it is too hard with trying to find people. But that communication piece helps the adjuster and helps the employer identify those that are going to be a problem. Now, I'm going to give you an example of one. We actually have, right now, at this very moment, surveillance going on a claimant that has convinced the doctor, and we're trying to get him away from that doctor, great doctor, but it's a muscular soft tissue injury, and those are so hard to prove and disprove, particularly here in Alabama. And he says he cannot work because he cannot put pressure on a leg. We have found that he's working in construction for another company, and he's on a job site today. So he's double dipping. He's getting paid from his new employer and trying to get a check. That is one reason why rates have gone down, and I anticipate rates are going to go back up, because we have had this anomaly, because those type of people weren't working in 2020, 2021, 2022. They started to see them come back in late 2022. But that can help usually identify. And with the end goal of the return to work, because I will tell you, the majority of the employees who get hurt, they just want to work. They want things to be back to normal. They don't like the burden of having to go. They want to go to their job daily as expected. They don't want to have to take off to go to the doctor, to go to therapy, and all of it's confusing to them. So those employers that what I would consider best in class, their end goal is for everybody to return to work each and every day. But this, to me, is what's probably helps prevent and mitigate more claims in the future. It's what they do before the claim. They invest in safety and culture. And that starts with employee training. And it's not just safety training. It's actual employee training, job task training. And it's heavy on the safety training. They actually put together staff or committees that audit their safety program, take ownership of that safety program, and they utilize technology, whether it's telematics, whether it's wearables, exoskeletons, whether it's, you know, utilizing apps. They invest heavily. They don't see that as a cost or a drain on their company. They see it as a opportunity to become more profitable. Another interesting footnote. So when we have someone enter in one of those alternative risk financing plans, like a deductible or a retro plan, we're going to ask to see their financials, and we're going to go back over some time. And what we're trying to determine is that the money there to pay for their risk. But the other thing we want to see is what they're putting towards training and safety. And what we see is, in comparison to those that are on the guaranteed cost, those companies that are entering those alternative risk finance plans are investing a whole lot more in training and safety, and just in staffing in general to promote a safer work culture. They own and invest in their insurance program, even if it's under guaranteed costs. They take ownership of it. They just don't rely upon their agent or broker. They don't view employee safety as a liability, but they view it as an opportunity to make more money. And last but not least, they view that employees are their company's most valuable asset, but more valuable than equipment. And there's a lot of debate and discussion about AI, but a lot of people come to that same conclusion. Humans are more valuable than AI. AI may get there one day, but right now, at the end of the day, a human has to be the one making the decision. And so they invest in the employees' wellness, and they invest in the hiring. And I'll finish on those last two things. What we often see is separates the ones that have few claims to those that have a lot of claims. It almost always goes back to hiring. And it's impossible to know everyone you hire, and it's impossible to find out everything you need to know about who you're hiring, especially in today's environment. But those that actually invest in that hiring process and do some background checks and do a thorough interview process, might do some fit testing beforehand, tend to have less claims than those companies who don't do that.
So obviously, shameless plug, we do pre-hire physical abilities testing. That's what I do. But most of the companies that we work with, their claims to new hires go down by about 78% after they start pre-hire physical abilities testing. That can't do anything with people you already got on your books. That's your baby. But at least to the new hires, those claims go down by about 78% because you're hiring. You can make your ergonomics as good as you can, but if somebody can't do the job, they can't do the job. How ergonomically correct it is, if they don't have the physical capacity to do it, they're going to get injured.
Yeah, we have 2 or 3 companies that we insure that no one else in the world, besides assigned risk, was willing to insure them. And we did an alternative risk financing program, set one up for them under the caveat that they were going to work with someone like you. And what we've seen is, man, they turn around quickly, real quickly. And then on the wellness, at the end of the day, what can make a big difference on the claim before the claim is how happy that employee is before they ever get hurt. Not just with their company, but with their life in general. Because when they get hurt, and you're going to have that human side comes in, depression, doubt, fear. And if you don't already have a good mindset going into that, it can elongate greatly a claim. And so we've been on a kick since just before in 2019, a wellness kick with and what we encourage the companies that we insure is that they promote to their employees to do three things: eat right, sleep right, and exercise 20, whether it's walk 20 minutes a day, whether just some form of physical fitness for 20 minutes a day. That's it.
Any questions on that?
Pam had a question earlier that we missed. Pam, you want to come on and ask that now?
I was asking, it was the difference about, between healthcare, construction, manufacturing. I think one was healthcare, what the difference was.
Yeah, good question. I'm glad because I really did not cover that. And a disclaimer for that category. So it's healthcare and I think it was like in social services.
Correct.
One of the big drivers in that particular category is not necessarily in the hospitals, but it tends to be nursing homes and retirement communities because they are doing a lot of lifting and with employees who don't go through the level of training that some go through that work for hospitals or physicians' offices. So the claims frequency within the nursing home and retirement community tends to be that they have much more frequent claims. Ironically, on the healthcare side, the severity of the claims tends to be a little bit more. So what I mean by that is if they do have a claim, the cost for the claim tends to be a little bit more. And typically that's because it's a more serious injury. It could be a slip or fall. It's not just a cut or they have more lost time claims in healthcare. The other thing that kind of complicates that is I mentioned at the very first slide that workers' compensation is federally mandated but regulated at the state level. That healthcare sector or industry is one that is vastly different state by state as what makes up or constitutes a claim. And we saw that up front and center with the coronavirus and the pandemic. But that was the one place, even here in Alabama, that if you were working in a hospital or for a healthcare provider and you got sick with a virus, that it could be deemed as work related. That's not so in construction in Alabama. Someone tried it, I think, in manufacturing. That's not so in most other industries. So that also kind of skews those numbers a little bit. I will tell you on the healthcare side, the thing I was going to tell you that was different. What makes them is the frequency. It's the number of claims. The severity of the claims out of those top 5 was less with healthcare than it was with any of the other 4 industries. So the cost per claim was much less for the healthcare category than it was for the others.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Your presentation. Okay, so again, thank you very much for attending today's workers' compensation presentation. Since there's only a few of us here today, we'll just go around and introduce ourselves with our name and who we are. I'm Tom tonight, the current president of the Alabama chapter.
I'm changing. I am Vincent Scott. I'm the secretary of chapter.
I'm Justin Shepard. I work for Rural Science and I'm the vice president of the ASSP.
Clint Fritz with Nelson Brothers, Director of Safety, Health, Environmental Security, and Loss Control. Holden Phillips with KDD Tech and Company Industrial Hygiene Division Manager.
Steve Orr, I'm the Fire Safety Director of Seven Research.
Tim Anderson with Alabama Concrete Industries Association.
I'm Randy Newsome, we do a site study and I'm the area director for ASSP. Jeff Rogers from Alabama AGC.
And Matt Hobbs not here, I think he slept off for a second, he's with safety. Anybody have any announcements at all? You have any announcements, Jeff, at all, coming up on anything?
No, well, I will, we may be alluding to this, future, but, Alabama Agency will be hosting its, construction risk, one-day mini conference on September 10th. It's called RiskCon. It'll be here from 9 to 3:30. We'll have some speakers that you're very familiar with, and we'll have, some not, sorry, but, we do, get the CE offers for that, and we'll make sure that you all get that information when the registration comes out.
We'll get it on our website, so forth. Okay, thanks. Anybody have any safety issues at all that they want to talk about?
Well, won't get a lot of shares, but everybody's been talking about OSHA not doing a lot of whatever. I was faced with a couple of citations that were expensive and were kind of odd. I mean, one of them was a trench that was $170,000. So. I mean, that's being used. Also, a couple of things in construction where silicon noise or something. Don't see those often.
One thing that I'll bring up is kind of a safety share. We've had, working with two companies in the last several weeks. That when we've done some job analysis for them to come back with some pretty heavy forces, they disagree with this, like, oh no, our guys don't do that. We're like, yeah, well, we just video them doing that, like, and then wait it, and so they go down onto the floor with us and find that the engineering fix they put in place, their employees are not using it. So if you guys do something like that, if you're working with your teams and implementing something like that, number one, get buy-in from the people on the floor first, get their opinions on like what's gonna work and what's not. And then if you do move forward with some engineering fix, do some auditing, some follow-up to make sure they're actually using that thing. One of it was a 90-pound lift that the piece of equipment that was supposed to fix it was sitting over against the wall collecting cobwebs when they were sure it was used. So if you're gonna do something like that, make sure that they're actually using the thing that you put in place.
Summer's coming up and obviously everybody's gonna go on a vacation, but there are some conferences coming up. Safety 2026 is gonna be out in Anaheim, California, next to Disneyland, if you wanna go to Disneyland. It's June 15th to the 16th. Obviously, the Governor's Safety and Health Conference is coming up down at the Presidio Resort, the 24th to the 26th in August. Great chance to get to the beach for a 2.5-day conference. And then I have it as August, but we learned now it's September 10th. So if you go to UAB, Deep South Center for Occupational Safety and Health, it does say August, but it's going to be September 10th for RiskCon. Some upcoming chapter meetings, our meeting's going to be early. It's going to be the 11th, which is a Thursday. Stephen Sawyer with Bradfield and Gorey is going to be doing a presentation. Instruction, he hasn't given me the title yet. He's going to send that to me probably next week. But they were doing it June 11th, and it'll be here at APC facility. We don't meet in July. Everybody have a nice vacation, enjoy yourself wherever you're going. Then August, we'll meet on the 20th, which is a Thursday, before the governor's conference. Presentation will be to be determined. Let's see, since summer's coming up, the training going on both at University of Alabama's OSHA Training Center and UAB is kind of falling down. There'll be less until August. It really picks up again. But there's a couple training sessions in June. One's on excavation and trenching, and another one's on public warehouse. Both of them are the week of the 6/15. One's 6/15 to the 17th. One's at the campus. That's the excavation one. The other one's virtual. UAB is doing nothing in June and July as far as training. They'll pick back up in August, and a couple coming up in August is audiometric testing. I think that's the initial, although it doesn't say it, was the 3rd to the 7th. And they also do their initial spirometry training on the 13th and 14th in August as well. And our next meeting will be June 11th, Thursday, early in June. So we'll be a little earlier. Until then, have a great rest of the month. Enjoy your Memorial Day holiday. Thank you.